Given the introduction to, or the instructions to give a TED Talk, is quite intimidating, and as we learned, a little bit illegal as well. But I'm just doing my job, my work, and I don't know if that falls into the category of last night, doing the illegal kind of work that David, but I don't think he's here to body slam me today. But so it was an intimidating thing because you don't know, I didn't know much about TED Talks anyway, so I went to the internet to find out how to do one of these things and hopefully to be introduced to this guy, Ted. And I went there and I found out that I need to come out and tell you that I am a thought leader. And I am supposed to pace around in a particular way that's going to draw you in. And I'm going to use my voice to inflect it at different points to really maximize impact. And I'm going to tell some stories that don't make any connections until the very end when I hook you in, and I'm going to leave with a roaring applause. That's what TED Talks on the internet taught me. So we'll see. So I'm not going to tell you I'm a thought leader. I am going to tell you I'm a pastor of a church that we say tries to be an ascending church. So what that means for us is a lot of things, but basically, we gather on Sunday to build up and to teach in and to pour in and to challenge, and we send out. And this is important because when we send people out at my church, we're sending out over 99% of our people, meaning 99% of our people are not coming back to me to staff meeting at church because they don't work at church. We're sending the vast majority of them out to the workplaces that work a lot of places alongside of you guys. And so what I thought I would do this morning is simply share something that I share with our people often. And it is it's a diagram, a picture. And I know that when I say I'm going to draw something, there's this expectation that I can do a good job at drawing. That's going to be quickly dispelled in a minute. But it's a diagram of the mission of God and how our part is played out, how our work comes out. And so really what I'm doing is just putting the pieces that we've been talking about all weekend together in a very, very simple and elementary kind of format. So we've got the screens behind me. We're going to start the broad strokes of the story of God and the mission of God and see the implications for work, and we'll be in and out. So we're going to start, as everything should, with God. And in the beginning, we know Genesis 1, God did something. God created all that is. He created the heavens and the earth, or a sack of potatoes, depending on how it gets. See, it's a beautiful earth on mine. I don't know, there's a misconnection because it's a beautiful earth on my iPad. So this begs the question for the reader of Genesis 1, which is why? Why would God do this? And we know as the story unfolds that God's mission, part of God's mission, is His working in all of creation for His glory. It's all about Him. It's all to exalt Him. Psalm 19, the earth or the heavens declare the glory of God. The earth, His fingerprints are everywhere intended. Everything is intended to bring Him glory. So we see that very early on in the story. But He didn't just create the earth. He created everything in it, and He created us. Very different than the other parts of creation. So if we come down here, we actually are going to talk about Adam and Eve and the original. And since they're in the garden, they can be without clothes and it's okay. That's hair for Eve to separate the differences. He created them very different, though, than every other creation. Genesis 1:26, there's this repetition going on. He created them in His image, and in the image of God He created them. He created the male and female. In His image, this word image gets repeated over and over. And this word image and the implications are huge. And we probably need David to come back and really give us all the implications of what it means to be created in God's image. But for this morning, this elementary exercise, it essentially means two different things. The ability to relate to God like no other creation can. And it also is the ability to represent Him accurately on earth, to reflect His image accurately. So then God has this creation of Adam and Eve, and He creates them very different than anything else and anyone else that's in creation. And He doesn't just leave it at that. He doesn't just retreat. He actually gives them a mission. He gives them a work. He gives them a job to do. And He also gives them a place to do it. He doesn't just put them in his hand and kind of roll them out into the earth as dice and say, wherever you land, like, I hope it works out for you. He actually, there's a very intentional word, he put them in the garden. And so there they are in the garden. And after Genesis 1:26 through 27, right after he says, you've been created in my image, he says, go be fruitful and what? There's this work that he gave them to do based on who God was and what he was doing in all of creation to bring him glory. He gave them a work to do, which was to be fruitful and multiply. Multiply what? Multiply themselves. Made in whose image? God's image. So what God wanted as he looked down on earth was to see a people that were multiplying themselves all over the earth, that were perfectly relating to God and perfectly representing him. That's what he wanted. He wanted to see his image reflected back. That was their work. At this point, we could cue at least parts of John Lennon's song, like, can you just imagine a world where we're not fighting and God did. God imagined that. And he's going to actually make that happen. So we know now that we have the mission of God, his working in all of creation for his own glory. Now the how? By spreading his image all over the earth. Again, people relating to God perfectly and representing him accurately. And notice just very quickly where we are in the story. Genesis 1 and 2, this has been pointed out this weekend. We haven't even gotten to the train wreck of what's coming next, but what we have here now is God has a mission, his mission has a people, his people have a work. Genesis 1 and 2. And then like a bad car wreck, you didn't see it coming, but it created tragedy. Genesis 3. Sin, rebellion, death enters into the story, and the reader is left with a question: will God's mission be stopped? And the answer is a resounding no. It won't be thwarted by anything, but something did happen. Here's what happened when sin entered into the story. We heard this last night, it marred our image. And when it marred our image, it broke the ability to relate to God perfectly and represent him accurately. The problem is that they did not stop multiplying themselves. But now they're multiplying not God's perfect image, they're multiplying their marred and distorted image, explaining the headlines that we wake up to every day, explaining why Tulsa exists, explaining why Charlotte exists, explaining why all the other bad headlines and all of the evil in our hearts, this explains it. We have a marred image being multiplied and spread over all the earth. But things will speed up now. God sent out a rescue mission. And it started with a man named Abraham, Genesis 12. And Father Abraham had many sons. So I'm going to put a bunch of people, and he's supposed to be this great family man that's going to eventually lead to a what? A nation, a people. God's mission always has a what? A people. And so right now we see the mission of God continuing by recreating, reforming a people. And this people was supposed to be his people. This people was to show the world what God was like. Genesis 12, again, it wanted to be a blessing to all the nations. Isaiah is full of passages about how God's people were intended to kind of reflect him and represent him well on earth. As a matter of fact, and just like he put Adam and Eve in a particular place, he led them to a particular place called the Promised Land. And he said, right here, I want you to relate to me. And here's how you relate to me. I'm going to give you the law. I'm going to give you the sacrificial system. I'm going to lay out everything you need to relate to me. And what I want you to do is represent me well. And he does so by placing them strategically along trade routes and where everything in the ancient world would kind of see this nation on display, but see beyond the nation and see the God of the nation. God's mission always has a people, and his people always have a work. That was their work. They didn't do a good job, though. But what did come out of this people in the Old Testament was Christ. Christ did a lot, obviously. He did what the people before him could not do and did not do. And he did it perfectly. He related to God perfectly and represented him accurately and perfectly. He did this not as a representation of God, but as an exact Not as a reflection of God, but as an exact representation of God. Paul tells us that it was the exact image of God because obviously he was God. We're not going to go through all the different implications of what Christ did, but through his work on the cross by conquering the grave, we talked about the gospel and the implications last night, he was able to offer redemption and salvation and restoration. And the Bible terms this in an interesting way. It says by recreating people, by making a new people, by making them a new creation in Christ. Here's how. The image of God inside of people, when they respond to the gospel, no longer remains marred, but redeemed. And where the relationship and the ability to represent were broken, it's now restored. And we focus a lot here. Like when someone responds to the gospel, they get to now open that line of communication, relationship back up to the Father. And I think a lot of us, like where we have failed you as pastors and lay people, is that we have stopped here at the height of the gospel is you relating to God once again, but that's not all that was lost in the garden. And God is about redeeming all things, and so the other thing that was lost in the garden was this ability to represent him accurately on earth. And so what Jesus does is he redeems the image of God in people, but that's not all. He also gathered who to himself? Gathered a people called the disciples. And he told these people, the night in which he was betrayed, he was praying for them, and he said, God, as you have sent me into the world, so I am sending. Very intentional word, very similar word to God putting the people, Adam and Eve, in a particular place for a particular work. Very intentional way of God leading the people in the Old Testament to the promised land. In the New Testament, when Christ is recreating this group of people, he says, I am sending them into the world to do what? To make disciples. What's a disciple? Who does a disciple look like? Jesus. So you need to see that when Christ is redeeming and recreating a people, he's restoring the image of God inside of them, giving them ability to relate to him again and also the ability to represent him. He's sending them out to do that with other people so that when God looks down on earth, he sees what he's always wanted to see. His image being reflected back to himself. And you can imagine a world that is lived for God's glory is our best world when we are relating to God through the lines of Christ and the avenues of Christ, and we're representing him all over the earth. This is helpful to me, at least, because this tells me that the mission is what the mission was. The mission hasn't changed. Essentially, it's the same. Make disciples made in the image of Jesus. I want to see the image of Jesus. I want to see my image reflected all over the earth. That means work is what work was. Living out the image of God. Where? Wherever he sends you. And what's that work involved? That work involves relating to God again and representing him accurately. I think sometimes we complicate things. As a Christian, you have been sent to relate to God. Now, all of a sudden, quiet times aren't even just for you. It's part of your work in the sense of it's part of being able to represent him. The deeper you go in your time with the Lord and in your time in his word, the more accurately you're going to be able to reflect him in all of the rest of life. So we're as a Christian, we've been sent to relate to God and represent him. Again, where? Everywhere he sends you. That means this transforms the way we think about where we go. We don't go anywhere anymore. You don't go to school, you don't go to the grocery store, you don't go to the gym. You're sent everywhere. You don't go to work anymore. Like, how about that for a takeaway from a gospel at work? Don't go to work anymore. You are sent to work, which completely elevates the 9 to 5. It puts it to mission status. You think, I have a meaningless job. That's more for people we've talked about this. No, there's no such thing as a meaningless job when your job is to relate to God and represent him wherever he has sent you. You are part of the recreated people of God. The other thing this is helpful is that here's what I also fear. I fear that we take this group of the church and we kind of splice it down. We'll leave 2 guys on the left and more guys on the right. And I think some people think that their job, their work, is to make money to give to the people that are doing the real work. And then we talked last night about what it meant to live for, work during the week so that you can get to the good stuff of the week. And sometimes I think that we live during the week so that we can support the real work. No, there are no, your job is not to support me to do my job. We are all in this together as the recreated people of God, having the image of God redeemed inside of us. We are all together supposed to relate to God and represent Him as He sends all of us out wherever that may be. We don't have conferences to figure out if there's purpose in work. We have conferences to help us flesh this out. God has a mission, His mission has a people, and His people have a work. And so what I wanted to do was show your work in all of that. Your work, my work, it's different in one sense, but it's the same in a deeper sense, to give God glory by spreading His image throughout the earth. How? Simply by relating to Him and representing Him accurately. So, Gospel at Work attendees, let's just go to work.